Well, folks, it's good to be back with you, and this is a two-part show, and we're on the second part today. Story of the man who was reputed to be the oldest man in the world. Bristol has lots of honors, lots of uniqueness about it. Well, we can say that one of the unique features is the fellow who was thought to be the oldest man in the world. His name is Silas Goodson, as I told you last time, and people called him Old Si. You heard how he thought he was going to live to be a great age, which he did, by strange habits he had, eating a quart of honey every day with buttermilk, and dipping himself in cold water or warm water, whatever the season was, every morning, and also sleeping out in the cold air, get the mountain breezes, as he called it. Well, he was, we left him at the King Plantation, Mountain View, which covers what is now downtown Bristol and a big area around it. And I mentioned the old King house at 54 King Street. Actually, most of that house is a newer built on through the years, but there are 2 rooms of it left. At Mountain View, he continued to sleep out in the yard. He'd lay with his face toward Shady Valley Mountain, or the mountain on which Shady Valley is located, and he said he would draw down those healthy mountain breezes. Well, he evidently did, that helped him live to be old. His dipping place was long known as the Prophet's Hole in Beaver Creek. For a few years, even after I came here, there were a few old-timers that would mention something about the Prophet's Hole. It was a deep part of Beaver Creek, directly in front of the present Bristol Public Library. There was a spring where the front of the library is now, and it formed a little brook that ran down toward the creek and entered the creek, and right there was a deep part of Beaver Creek. They called it the Prophet's Hole. Winter and summer, even if there's snow on the ground and below zero, he would go down there and dip in that hole. He said that cold water made him come alive. Well, I guess it'd make me come alive for a minute, but I'm not sure it would be good right on. However, he practiced that as long as he lived. He, one year in 1846, I believe it was, he prophesied that 10 years from that year there would be the coldest winter ever known in this part. Well, in 1856, we did have a very, very frigid winter. I have an old letter here that speaks of being snow on the ground, and they hadn't seen the ground for about 3 months. It just stayed on all winter. And the same letter says for 3 nights in a row now we've had 10 below zero and about 10 above in the daytime. Well, his prophecy came true, but that wasn't the only one. You see, the Kings had a son named William too. Now, not the William that I talked about last week. This was William, the son of Reverend James King. He was making a doctor. He'd gone to study medicine out somewhere, and he also was studying under other physicians. But the Mexican War came along, and he decided he wanted to volunteer, Tennessee volunteer, and go to that war. He did. But after the war was ended, the letter came to Mountain View telling that he would be home soon. They were so happy. But old Si wasn't happy. He was sad. He finally said, "No, Master King," he's now speaking to Reverend James King, that we get all these James mixed up. There's 3 in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, actually 4 in a row. However, the 4th one died as a child. But anyway, to his master at this time would have been Reverend James King. And so he said, Master King, William will never be home. I done seed him going down in the deep waters of the ocean and mountains of water rolling over him. Wasn't too long after that till a letter came. And incidentally, that letter is here at Pleasant Hill today. It's stowed away upstairs. Telling that when about 3 days out of New Orleans, they were crossing the Gulf in a ship, coming home, true enough, but about 3 days out of New Orleans, William King was taken ill suddenly. He was well the night before, but by morning he had died. Some kind of a very fast-acting fever, I guess. I'm not sure what it was. But anyway, he died. And the captain refused to bring the body onto the land because he's afraid it might contain germs that the other members of the crew would get, and so on. So they put him in the water, and as Si had seen in his vision, mountains of water rolled over him. Well, that was another prophecy that he made that came true. He also, in time, he got up early, and old Master King was up early walking around over. They had 4 acres for a yard, and he would often get out there and stroll around over the 4-acre yard. West Lawn Street here in Bristol is named because it was on the west side of that big lawn. So west of the lawn became West Lawn Street. It's up there on Solar Hill today, here on Solar Hill today. He was excited that morning. He said, Master King, within a few years, down there in the valley where your cattle are grazing this morning, there's going to be a city spread over that big pasture. Meadow down there. I've done seen it in a vision. I've seen, looked like 10,000 candles burning in the valley, and I heard a roaring, and every once in a while the blast sounded like 1,000 trumpets. There's going to be a city right down there where there's cows are grazing peacefully this morning. And he said, I'm going to help with the beginning of it. I'll have a part in the beginning of it. Well, 1852, when Bristol was laid off, old Si Goodson was the chain bearer for the surveyors. Indeed, he did help lay off the town of Bristol. And they told for years as he would go along, every once in a while, and he was then 120 years old or thereabout, every once in a while he would say to them, this is just like I seed it, just like I seed it. The Kings later deducted that maybe the 10,000s of candles that he saw burning in the valley meant the lights of a future city there. And that he had also said there's a sound like the roaring of a bad storm, and every once in a while blast of 10,000 trumpets. They assumed that meant the railroad, the trains passing by and blasting forth with their whistles. They kind of interpreted the dream for him, and that's what they supposed. Well, in time, his prophecy came true. And then the Kings decided to build a new house way down the river, way down Beaver Creek. It was about where the Melrose Street Bridge crosses Beaver now. Right there is where he chose to build another house. Why he left the hill, no one really knows. Some say it's lack of water up there. They had a cistern, but they was having a water problem. And some say he did it because of that. There's a big spring where he built down there. He was happy there, and he told old Si one day, he said, I want to spend my final years right here. I'm at the last move, I've made my last move, and I want to live there. Right on. Old Si shook his head and said, no, you won't live your last years here. You're going to live your last years on the old feedlot. That's where they fed the cattle in downtown Bristol. It's be the northeast corner of Moore State now. That was where they fed. It was the old feedlot. Of course, it's pretty rich ground. And when they moved there, old Miss King, who always loved roses, had so many planted that they called the new estate Rose Lawn. Of course, he didn't build that house. It was built by Thomas Johnston, but he lived there. He bought it, and the reason he bought it was because of the Civil War. They were out in the country, so to speak. Well, down Melrose Street would have been the country then, and they were subject to raids by bushwhackers. And in order to be a little safer, they did move into Bristol, and King's last years were indeed spent on the old feedlot. The house was torn down in 1887, and a new building was built which stands today and has been in the family continuously ever since. King heirs own it now. Antique shop on the corner, and was a jewelry store, but I think it moved out right by it. Well, then one time King said to old Si that when my final day comes, I want to see my last sunset over those knobs back of Beaver Creek. And old Si said, no, Master King, you won't. The last sunset that you see will be at the end of mile-long cotton rows over a line of tupelo trees. That puzzled King, because we don't have at least we don't have the same tree they call a tupelo. Tupelo, Mississippi is named for a tree, of course. And some tell me they're of the sweet gum family. I don't know. I don't really know what they are. But here this man, who had never heard tell of a tupelo tree supposedly, said, you will die where the last sunset you will see will be sitting over tupelo trees at the end of mile-long cotton rows. In the summer of 1867, Reverend King took some of his grandchildren, got on the train, and rode to Monroe County, Mississippi, where his daughter Margaret's husband, John G. English, had established Strawberry Point plantation. It was a large plantation. I've been there, but it's now divided up into lots, not lots, but tracts. But you can still tell the outline of the old plantation pretty well. The house is long gone, unfortunately. But King went there to visit. On Saturday night, he preached in a church that had been built for the slaves on that plantation. And of course, the war was over then. There were no slaves. There were tenants of the old slaves on the farm. But he saw his last sunset, just like old Si said, over a row of tupelo trees at the end of mile-long cotton rows. He was shaving the next morning and died suddenly, dropped dead. So Si again proved the truth. What happened to old Si? He is running up the hill beyond 9th Avenue now, or 9th Street, a steep hill up to where Belvedere Mansion is. It's just a flat point on the end of the mountain at that time. He was running up there, and in what's now the yard of Belvedere, his heart, 130-year-old heart, gave out, and he fell forward dead. He was buried first in what they call the Rose Hill Cemetery, slave cemetery, where Rose and 7th joined. But he was later taken up. He now rests in the slave part of East Hill Cemetery. You can see the little cemetery up there where he is resting today. So it was with the supposed oldest man in the world. Bristol had the honor of claiming that, at least. Until we meet again, I hope your life is happy and good, and the best of everything yours.